Welcome to The Third Story. On today's program, we're going to talk about discipline. We'll see an instructor give some young students a lesson in flying.
And we'll see Sigrid lose patience over a dress she's sewing.
While our professor can't believe his eyes when he discovers a wet paint sign on his favorite park bench.
But first, have you ever wondered how they get those steel balls into the ball bearings of a bike wheel? Our first story shows us how important it is to do things right.
There is motion all around us, and everywhere we have motion, there is resistance or friction. Since early times, man has cut down trees and used them to make rollers to move heavy objects. Eventually, he developed the wheel and axle and bearings to help the wheel rotate freely. Now we've got bearings literally everywhere. It's one of the inventions that has caught on in every type of industry, wherever we travel, and in our homes and appliances. In the basic ball bearing, there's a metal ring with a groove in it. It's called the outer race. Then there's an inner ring with a groove called the inner race. Balls are formed and placed to roll inside these grooves or channels. They are made with extreme precision, not loose-fitting or too tight. Here's how a bearing salesman explains it.
A tolerance that would be allowable in there would be like, say, 1/5 the diameter of a human hair. This would be the tolerance that is required for the lubricant film to develop on the running path of that bearing.
Let's say a bearing is manufactured and a ball happens to get in there that's too big. A problem will soon develop. As that ball comes through the load zone, the place where the bearing is carrying the most weight, because it is too large, it will carry the whole load by itself instead of sharing it. Very quickly there will be damage to this steel. Even though steel seems hard to us, if it is under pressure, it rolls like dough under a rolling pin. Soon the ball that is too large will be pressed out of shape, or it will chip and break, and the bearing will burn out.
There is an Anti-Friction Bearing Manufacturers Association that is established around the world, and all bearing manufacturers need to comply with the tolerances. As an example, the aircraft industry alone has jet engines that rotate at very, very high speeds. Bearings would have to be very, very precision fit, and they're very carefully manufactured.
A problem can develop in a bicycle if the wheels are not tightened properly.
A young person adjusting those lock nuts and spinning the axle and possibly looking at it as being okay, he'll put it into the fork and then lock up the outside jam nuts. Many times that running clearance now is 0. And not only will that young lad be having pedal pressure that possibly require 5 times the force to get up to speed, but he will actually damage those bearings in a very short time. The metal will begin to flake out on the raceways normally, and the balls will begin to chip, so that eventually he'll have a very rough riding, noisy wheel developing. It'll throw all the grease out, run hot, and that if he's traveling along high speed will damage that bearing.
Bearings are used in critical areas, like in hospitals in the mechanical rooms. Here it is just not tolerable to have equipment failure, like during an operation. And they're used extensively in industry, in generators or electric motors. Serious problems can develop if these bearings are not greased properly.
This will cause scoring of the steel in such a fashion you'll pick up the steel actually, and now you're jamming little particles of steel between the rolling elements. That running clearance is no longer there. That bearing can pack up within 2 or 3 hours. It'll become noisy, it'll overheat, and will burn up, and literally melt and seize itself to the shafts. We have seen in industry the shaft like that actually become red hot, and the whole rotor of a motor will actually stop dead. That element that was rotating externally on that motor shaft will now take off and go through building walls and damage equipment like you wouldn't believe. So it's not something to take lightly if your bearings are not functioning properly.
There is a time and place to take great care. A bearing is one example in life where precision is very important.
You know, Phyllis, that explains a lot about the front wheel of my bike.
I still don't know how they get those steel balls in there. We'll be back with a story on flying.
We could say that discipline is a kind of training that develops character and self-control.
There are times when we depend very heavily on good training. For example, when flying in an airplane, for some reason, I like to fly with a pilot who knows what he's doing.
Our objective here is to teach them to fly as efficiently as possible, to make them as skilled as we can possibly make them, so that should they end up in difficult flying situations, they would be able to cope with them. For example, if they went to the mission field as pilots, they would be flying off mud fields that would be short. At the end there would be no field. There's cliffs that you literally fly right off into the air. And hopefully that's where at least some of those students that we're training would end up as missionary pilots. That's really our objective for teaching them. Here in Canada, if they didn't wish to go to the mission field, they would possibly end up in a northern environment. They could be flying for perhaps the federal government or provincial government in say, with the Department of Indian Affairs, northern Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or Ontario, or wherever, providing a service to the natives and to Canadians in the north. Or they could go, if their skills led them in that direction, to commercial airlines. Some of the conditions that they'll find themselves in is being called in the morning to go and pick up a pregnant wife some 700 or 800 miles away at an 800-foot strip, and when they get there they find it's been raining for 3 or 4 days. It's monsoon season, and they have to land in this mud and load this pregnant wife and fly her out to some hospital somewhere. And while they're there, they find out that she's not the only passenger they have. They have perhaps a sick native youngster or a sick native parent, and they have to go somewhere else with them because they won't take them at particular hospitals. The natives have to go to certain hospitals, and Canadian missionaries' wives have to go to other hospitals. So the situation would be to get those people airborne again off that short, muddy strip. Some of the situations they run into are engine failures on takeoff over in those places where it's war-torn, Zimbabwe or wherever.
Okay, so we start our walk around by checking the pushrod bolt that actuates the flap. And we can also feel underneath here with the bolt, if you'd like to look underneath here. See that the bolts are done up properly, but they're not loose. Just the general condition of the flap, you can give it a little tug to make sure that it's not excessively loose. Then we get to the aileron, check the hinges, check underneath the aileron. You'd have to...
I got a letter the other week from a missionary pilot who said they had an interesting thing happen to them. They were taking off and they had an engine failure in takeoff. The only place they could land was a road straight ahead, and there was a group of natives walking on it, of course all with their backs to the aircraft. With an engine failure there's not much noise, and they hoped that the natives would hear them before they rolled them over, and fortunately they did and ran off to the side and got into the bush. Another situation I read about, a missionary pilot over in one of the war-torn areas of Africa was getting shot at with rockets from the Russians because he strayed just a few feet into another country, and was, in fact, they attempted to shoot him down using missiles. So it's not a fun game over there. But that's the place that some of those young pilots will go to, hopefully. The rewarding thing about this thing that we're doing here in teaching young people to fly is the accomplishment that we see in their lives, and feeling that we're doing something that they in turn will go and help other people, that they're contributing to society and to the benefit of society.
Sometimes it's hard to stick with the project. We'd like to slough off or bend the rules to make things easier for ourselves.
Sleeves. Is there any more of that delicious chocolate cake?
Haven't you had at least 4 pieces already?
3, only 3.
One more would make it 4.
Sewing on this machine is hard work, and I need the energy.
While you're up, Sigrid, would you get me a cup of coffee, please? I don't think it's the machine that's your problem. It was working fine yesterday.
Why don't you do it then?
I have to get these books done tonight.
I think I'll just give it back to Sherry.
Why are you sewing Sherry's project anyway?
She helped me with my math, so I said I'd help her with her sewing.
I didn't know you were having trouble with your math.
I'm not. I just left it too late.
I thought chocolate cake gave you zits.
One more piece isn't going to make any difference. Now, why doesn't the sleeve fit in the armhole? Things never work out for me the first time.
Are you following your instructions carefully? It shows you exactly what to do here. You sure up your sleeve, then you sew it into your armhole. Then you sew up this seam. You're going to have to take that seam out.
On both sleeves?
If you want it to look right.
Sherry will never notice if I take a shortcut. She hates home ec.
It'll be very obvious on the finished product, and it'll always be uncomfortable under the arm.
She'll never wear this thing.
If you do a good job, you may start a new fad.
I hate sewing. Nothing ever turns out for me.
You have to do things right in order for them to turn out right.
Oh no! Now I've gotten icing all over the dress. Why don't I junk this whole thing? Better yet, why don't you take over, Mom?
I told you I can't.
I need a piece of pie. I need more energy.
Sigrid!
Oh, Mother, don't nag.
Scientists are people who need to have a lot of discipline. They discover laws in nature and work according to these laws.
Through a lot of hard work and creativity, one scientist discovered an unbelievable number of uses for the lowly peanut.
There was a time when farmers in the southern United States depended on one main crop for their living: cotton. But the cotton fields had an enemy that caused great hardship. It was an insect called the boll weevil. Something very unusual happened with the boll weevil. In spite of all the problems it caused, the farmers erected a monument to it with these words: "In profound appreciation of the boll weevil and what it has done." Why would an insect that caused a great deal of devastation have a monument of appreciation erected to it? Well, it came about as a result of the disciplined life of a black man named George Washington Carver. Carver was a scientist. He also had a deep faith in God. He believed that God had made many things for people to use and enjoy, and he made it his business to discover them. He studied hard in the midst of many difficulties to learn science. He formed a lifelong habit of rising at 4 a.m. to go into the woods to study the lessons of nature. He said, "At no other time have I so sharp an understanding of what God means to do with me as in these hours of dawn." He was also committed to helping poor farmers. When the boll weevil moved in and took their main source of income, he showed them how to raise crops other than cotton. peanuts, sweet potatoes, and soybeans. But that created a new problem. There were not enough uses for these crops. With his faith in the Creator and his knowledge of chemistry, George Washington Carver took the peanut apart. He found that it was made of water, fats, oils, resins, sugars, and starches. Using these elements, he concocted an amazing variety of products such as a dozen beverages, chili sauce, instant coffee, salve, bleach, wood filler, metal polish, paper, ink, plastics, shaving cream, linoleum, shampoo, axle grease, synthetic rubber. 300 products in all from the little peanut alone. One example of a helpful product was peanut milk. In certain parts of Africa, cows could not be kept because of leopards and flies. So if a mother died, her baby would be buried with her because there was nothing to feed it. When missionaries obtained peanut milk, they gave that to the babies and saved them. Because of all the uses for peanut products, there was a good market for the farmers. The peanut became one of the 6 leading crops. Carver had successfully worked around the boll weevil. George Washington Carver became very famous, but he remained humble throughout his life. At one point, he turned down a $100,000 job offer to work with Thomas Edison. Fellow scientists were sometimes suspicious of his references to God, and it seemed unbelievable that someone would disregard the pleasures of life as he did. But the disciplines he lived by, along with his great desire to help poor farmers, resulted in significant advances that have affected the lives of all of us.
Can you imagine that? 300 products from a peanut? Who knows what else is waiting to be discovered by someone with the stick-to-itiveness of George Washington Carver?
That's right. We'll be back with more after this break. Our next story goes back about 2,000 years. It's about a very special person who lived a life of discipline that we can benefit from today.
No one person has had a greater influence upon the world than Jesus Christ. That's because he was a very special person. God's Son come down to earth in the form of a human being. What was his visit to earth really like? How did he live? The New Testament in the Bible tells us, for one thing, he didn't own his own home. He once said, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but I, the Messiah, have no home of my own, no place to lay my head." He chose 12 disciples. For 3 years, these men followed him wherever he went, learning from him, soaking in the stories he told, watching him do miracles, learning from his discipline. And he prayed a lot, sometimes early in the morning, for hours at a time, especially when he was under a lot of stress. Once he met the devil face to face. It happened when Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days and nights without food. The devil tempted him in every way, trying to get him to fall. He tempted him to make food by changing stones into loaves of bread. "It will prove you are the Son of God," he said. But Jesus told him, "No, for the Scriptures tell us that bread won't feed men's souls. Obedience to every word of God is what we need." Then the devil took him to Jerusalem to the roof of the temple. "Jump off," he said, "and prove you are the Son of God." Jesus retorted, "It also says not to put the Lord your God to a foolish test." Next, Satan took him to the peak of a very high mountain and showed him the nations of the world and all their glory. "I'll give it all to you," he said, "if you will only kneel and worship me." "Get out of here, Satan," Jesus told him. "The Scriptures say, 'Worship only the Lord God, obey only Him.'" Then the devil went away, and the angels came and cared for Jesus. Satan could not get Jesus to give in to his temptations. Jesus' deep commitment to obeying his Heavenly Father and his life of discipline helped him to go on to have the most powerful and unusual life anyone could ever have.
So far in this program, we've seen how important it is to do things right. One way to describe discipline is to say that it is action based on right thoughts. Our actions reflect what we think.
Right thoughts come to us from God, through the Bible. It's important to stick with what we know is right, and that's not always easy. We'll be back to tell you about a special gift we'd like to send you.
We enjoy the challenge here at the Third Story of looking for stories we think you'll enjoy. But we like to hear your ideas too.
Why don't you write and tell us some of your experiences and what you've learned from them? Or just write and ask for the Third Story Survival Kit.
It has a survival poster, a book of the Bible about the life of Christ, some cards to send to your friends, and some of the stories on these programs.
When you write, address your letter to The Third Story, Box 2, Station F, Winnipeg, Manitoba. That's The Third Story, Box 2, Station F, Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Here's what one person wrote. I enjoy watching your program and thought I'd let you know my experience. I spent 5 years in West Africa. Where we lived, some of the natives had never seen a white person before the bauxite mines started there. I was bit by a deadly viper snake there, and it was scary, but the doctor got the snake bite serum injected into me in time.
Remember that it's important to do things the right way. That's especially important in the way we live. God's Son Jesus is the one person who can give us the very best advice. Read all about it in his book, the Bible.
See you next week.